pretty good team.
That was pretty. It was
What
pretty
made
decent.
that team so good, you two?
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Caitlin Clark is not just another basketball player. She is a phenomenon, a once-in-a-generation talent who has completely transformed the way the WNBA is watched, discussed, and experienced. From the moment she stepped onto the professional stage, she brought with her a level of excitement that the league had rarely seen before. Arenas that once struggled to fill seats suddenly became electric, packed with fans eager to witness her deep-range shooting, her elite court vision, and her fearless style of play. Every time she touches the ball, something feels possible. Every possession becomes an event. She doesn't just play the game, she bends it to her will. And that's exactly why what happened next feels so confusing, so unexpected, and frankly, so hard to explain. Just one game ago, Caitlin Clark looked like the undisputed engine of Team USA's offense. She was pushing the pace, controlling the tempo, and orchestrating plays with the precision of a seasoned maestro. The ball moved effortlessly through her hands, and the entire team seemed to feed off her energy. Fast breaks were constant. Transition offense was lethal. Defenses couldn't get set in time, and when they tried, Clark would pick them apart with pinpoint passes that traveled the length of the court and landed exactly where they needed to be. It wasn't just effective, it was beautiful basketball. The kind of basketball that makes you stop what you're doing and watch. But then came game 2, and suddenly everything changed. Instead of leading the offense, Clark found herself on the bench. 16 minutes played. 0 assists.
No rhythm.
No control. No presence. It wasn't just that she was limited. It felt like she had been completely removed from the equation. The same player who had just dominated the flow of the game was now a non-factor. And the most shocking part? The system seemed to continue without her, as if the team had deliberately chosen to move in a completely different direction. So the question becomes unavoidable. How does the brightest star in women's basketball go from being the centerpiece of everything to practically invisible overnight? To understand this, you have to look at the contrast between the two games. In the first game, everything was fast, fluid, and aggressive. Clark would grab the ball and immediately push it up the floor before the defense even had a chance to react. Players were sprinting into position, cutting through lanes, creating movement that kept defenders guessing. The ball didn't stick, it flowed. It moved quickly, decisively, and with purpose. And at the center of it all was Clark, making every decision, reading every angle, and creating opportunities out of nothing. Team USA didn't just look good, they looked unstoppable. In the second game, that identity disappeared. The pace slowed down dramatically. Instead of attacking in transition, the team settled into half-court sets that felt rigid and predictable. The ball would swing to the wing and just stop. Players began calling for isolation plays. Possessions dragged on without direction, often ending in contested mid-range shots that had little chance of success. The rhythm was gone. The flow was gone. And most importantly, the creativity was gone. It didn't look like the same team. It looked like a completely different system. And when a system changes that drastically, it doesn't just affect one player. It affects everyone. Take Alyssa Thomas, for example. In the first game, she was dominant, putting up 21 points and playing with confidence and aggression. In the second game, she managed just 5 points on inefficient shooting. That's not just a bad night. That's a player struggling to adapt to a completely different role. When production drops that sharply, it's not about individual failure. It's about the environment changing around the player. And that brings us back to Clark. There was one moment in the game that perfectly captured what was happening. Angel Reese had the ball near half court. Clark was open, clearly calling for the ball, ready to initiate the offense. She was in position. She was visible. She was asking for the play. But Reese didn't pass. She didn't even look. Instead, she drove into traffic and turned the ball over. Now, no one can say exactly what was going through Reese's mind in that moment. But from a viewer's perspective, it didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a decision.
But they're not going to do that. And with Noelle Quinn, as you mentioned, no challenge.
Clark.
And decisions like that don't happen in isolation. They reflect the tone, the structure, and the priorities of the system the team is operating within. Because in a system that fully embraces a playmaker, like Clark, that pass is automatic. In a system that doesn't, it becomes optional. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because this isn't just about one game or one player, it's about philosophy. It's about coaching. It's about what kind of basketball this team is trying to play. Despite the struggles, there were still strong individual performances. Paige Buchers led the team with 16 points and showed flashes of brilliance. Angel Reese recorded another double-double. Kelsey Plum contributed 12 points, and Jackie Young was efficient in her minutes. The talent was clearly there. On paper, this was still one of the most stacked rosters in the world. But talent alone doesn't guarantee success. And in this case, it didn't guarantee cohesion either. Because what was missing wasn't skill, it was connection. There was no real ball movement. No consistent off-ball action. No shared rhythm. It felt less like a unified team and more like a group of individuals taking turns. Instead of a synchronized machine, it looked like a collection of talented strangers running drills. Even against a team like Puerto Rico, an opponent that realistically should have been overmatched, the game felt far closer than it should have been. The margin of victory didn't reflect dominance. It reflected discomfort. And that leads to the bigger conversation, the one that can't be ignored. The role of Stephanie White. Because what happened in Game 2 didn't just happen randomly. There is context behind it, and once you start looking into that context, the situation becomes a lot more complex. Stephanie White is not just any coach. She has a strong resume, including a Coach of the Year award and multiple deep playoff runs. She has a deep understanding of the game and a clear vision for how she wants her teams to operate. When she was hired by the Indiana Fever, it was seen as a major win for the organization, a move that would bring structure, discipline, and a winning mentality. But here's where things get interesting. Before taking that role, White coached against Caitlin Clark. Extensively. Successfully. She built defensive schemes specifically designed to slow Clark down. She studied her tendencies. She learned how to disrupt her rhythm. And she executed those strategies effectively over the course of an entire season. Now, she's in a position where she's not just coaching around Clark, she's influencing how she's used. And that raises a difficult question. Is the system we're seeing designed to maximize Clark's strengths? Or is it unintentionally or intentionally limiting them? Because when you listen to White speak, she emphasizes structure, accountability, and balance. She talks about making sure multiple players are involved, about creating a system where no single player dominates the flow. And while that approach has its merits, it can also come into conflict with the kind of free-flowing, high-tempo style that makes Clark so effective. This isn't about right or wrong, it's about fit. And right now, the fit doesn't look seamless. Especially when you consider that White is also closely involved with Team USA during this tournament. She's watching everything. Every rotation. Every decision. Every minute Clark plays, or doesn't play. So when you see Clark sitting on the bench, when you see the offense slowing down, when you see possessions that lack creativity, it's impossible not to wonder how much of that is by design. Because systems don't just appear overnight. They are built, they are implemented, and they're enforced. Which brings us back to the original mystery. How does a player go from being the centerpiece of everything to barely being involved at all? The answer isn't simple. It's not just about performance or matchups or game flow. It's about philosophy. It's about control. It's about the direction a team chooses to take and the players it chooses to prioritize within that direction. Caitlin Clark hasn't changed, but the system around her clearly has. And until those two things align again, this tension, this contrast, this confusion is going to remain one of the most fascinating storylines in all of women's basketball.
Here comes Sabali. Clark.
Before the second game even tipped off, something unusual had already begun to unfold, and it didn't happen on the court, it happened online. When Yahoo Sports shared a series of practice photos showing Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White in conversation, fans immediately zoomed in, analyzed every detail, and started forming opinions. It wasn't about stats or highlights this time. It was about body language. And almost instantly, a wave of reactions flooded social media. People began pointing out that Clark didn't look like herself. They described her posture as reserved, her expressions as distant, and her overall demeanor as disengaged. Some fans went as far as saying she looked uncomfortable or even unhappy standing next to White. Now, reading body language from a still image is far from an exact science. Anyone can misinterpret a moment frozen in time. But when thousands of viewers independently come to similar conclusions from the same images, it tells you something important about perception. At the very least, it highlights that something about the optics didn't sit right with the audience. And then the game happened, and instead of calming those concerns, it amplified them. Everything that made the first game so electrifying seemed to vanish overnight. The transition offense that had turned heads and created highlight after highlight was completely gone. Those full-court passes that once sliced through defenses like lasers? Gone. The constant movement, the pace, the unpredictability? Gone. In their place was a slow, structured, almost rigid style of play that felt disconnected from everything fans had just witnessed 24 hours earlier. And at the center of that shift was Caitlin Clark, except this time, she wasn't orchestrating the offense. She was standing in the corner, watching it unfold through someone else's hands. Play after play, possession after possession, it became impossible to ignore. The offense no longer revolved around her ability to create, to pass, to manipulate defenses. Instead, it resembled a controlled, egalitarian system, one that prioritized balance, structure, and shared responsibility. On paper, that sounds like a solid philosophy. But in practice, it looked like a complete departure from what makes Clark special. And that's where the comparison becomes critical. Because this system felt very similar to the one Stephanie White implemented during her time with the Connecticut Sun, a system built around disciplined half-court execution, defensive principles, and controlled pacing. In Connecticut, that approach worked. It fit the personnel. Players like Alyssa Thomas thrived in that environment, using strength, positioning, and experience to dominate within a structured framework. But now, the context is entirely different. Now, you're dealing with Caitlin Clark, a player whose entire identity is built on speed, creativity, and chaos in the open floor. She thrives in transition. She thrives when the game is unpredictable. She thrives when she has the freedom to read, react, and create in real time. Trying to fit that kind of player into a slow, methodical system is like putting a Formula One engine into a minivan. The power is there, the capability is undeniable, but the system isn't built to handle it. And instead of maximizing that power, it ends up restricting it. Some analysts and podcast hosts have even speculated, half jokingly, half seriously, that this shift felt intentional, as if someone behind the scenes decided to dial things back after Clark's explosive performance in game.
The ball in transition. Oh, that's not gonna waste.
Of course, there's no concrete evidence to support that kind of claim, and it would be unfair to treat speculation as fact. Head coach Dawn Staley, Carl Lawson, made it clear before the tournament that rotations would change, lineups would be experimented with, and the focus would be on building chemistry rather than sticking to a fixed system. From a coaching perspective, that explanation makes perfect sense. This is, after all, a qualifying tournament, and Team USA has already secured its place in the World Cup. But here's where things get complicated. A reasonable explanation doesn't always mean it's the correct one. Because what we witnessed wasn't just a minor adjustment, it was a complete philosophical shift. You don't go from allowing a player to freely run the offense, rack up 17 points and 12 assists in under 20 minutes, and completely control the game, to positioning her in the corner with limited involvement the very next day without a deliberate decision being made. That kind of change doesn't happen accidentally. It's chosen. And when you look at who's standing on the sidelines, observing every play, every substitution, every moment, it becomes harder to ignore the connections. Stephanie White, now Clark's head coach in Indiana, is right there, just feet away from Team USA's decision-making process. And the offensive system suddenly begins to resemble exactly what she has publicly stated she wants to implement at the professional level. You don't need to jump to conspiracy theories to notice that. You just need to pay attention. And that's what makes the upcoming WNBA season so incredibly intriguing, and at the same time, a little concerning. The Indiana Fever are on the brink of something special. Even without a fully healthy Caitlin Clark for most of the previous season, they pushed one of the league's strongest teams to the limit. The potential is undeniable. The ceiling is incredibly high. But that ceiling depends on one crucial factor: how the team chooses to use its most valuable asset. Because there are two very different versions of this future. In one version, Clark is given the keys to the offense. She plays fast, pushes the tempo, creates opportunities, and elevates everyone around her. The team becomes dynamic, unpredictable, and incredibly difficult to defend. In the other version, the system slows down. The pace is controlled.
Her teammate and laid it in. She's got 20.
The structure takes priority, and Clark is asked to adapt, to fit into a framework that may not fully align with her strengths. That tension between freedom and control, between creativity and structure, is going to define everything. And if Game 2 is any indication, that tension is very real. Now let's look at the numbers, because this is where the conversation shifts from interpretation to undeniable fact. In the first game, Clark delivered a performance that was nothing short of historic. Coming off the bench, she scored 17 points and dished out 12 assists in just 19 minutes. She shot efficiently, knocked down 4 of her 5 three-point attempts, and converted every free throw she took. Her decision-making was sharp, her timing was perfect, and her impact was massive. When you combine her scoring and assists, she was directly responsible for nearly 40 points, almost matching the entire output of the opposing team. It wasn't just a good performance. It was one of the most impressive debuts in the history of USA basketball. And she did it after 8 months away from competitive play. That alone should tell you everything you need to know about her talent. But then came Game 2. And suddenly, those numbers dropped dramatically. 8 points, 2 assists, limited involvement, reduced rhythm. The same player, under completely different circumstances, produced a completely different result. And if you try to explain that away as natural variation, it simply doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Because basketball doesn't work like that. Players don't go from historic efficiency to near invisibility overnight without something changing around them. And one of the clearest examples of that change can be seen in her three-point shooting. In Game 1, Clark looked confident, balanced, and in rhythm. Her shots came naturally, off movement, off passes, within the flow of the offense. In Game 2, she missed most of her attempts, including some open looks. But those misses don't tell the full story. Because shooting isn't just about mechanics, it's about rhythm. It's about timing. It's about involvement. When a player is actively engaged, constantly moving, touching the ball, and reading the game, their shooting tends to reflect that flow. But when you take that same player, park her in the corner, limit her touches, and remove her from the action for extended periods, everything changes. The legs go cold. The timing disappears. The confidence fades. That's not a coincidence. That's cause and effect. And that's why this isn't just a conversation about performance. It's a conversation about system design. Because when the system fails to utilize its best player effectively, the responsibility doesn't fall on the player. It falls on the system. Even Clark herself hinted at this after the game, though in the most diplomatic way possible. She mentioned that the opposing zone defense slowed the team down and acknowledged that she would have liked to take more shots. She described the overall play as a little clunky, a phrase that, while understated, perfectly captured what everyone watching had already noticed. The difference between the two games wasn't subtle. It was stark. And when you zoom out even further, the implications become even bigger. Because this isn't just about one game or one tournament. This is about the global stage. This is about how women's basketball is presented to the world. These games are being watched by audiences who may be experiencing the sport for the first time. The World Cup is on the horizon. The spotlight is brighter than ever. And in that moment, the decision was made to bench the most exciting player in the game, slow the pace to a crawl, and run a system that stripped away the very elements that made the team captivating in the first place. From a pure basketball standpoint, you can debate the reasoning. But from a marketing standpoint, it's much harder to justify. Because when you have a player who can transform the energy of an entire arena, who can draw viewers from around the world, who can turn every possession into a highlight, you don't hide that player. You showcase her. You build around her. You let her shine. Instead, what we saw was the opposite. And whether that was intentional or not, it's a decision that has sparked questions, debates, and concerns that aren't going away anytime soon. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about Caitlin Clark. It's about what happens when generational talent meets conflicting philosophy. And right now, that story is just getting started.
It's not about your competition, who you're playing. It's about being confident in who you are.
Let's be clear about something right from the start. What we are witnessing right now goes far beyond basketball strategy, rotations, or experimental lineups. This is bigger than coaching philosophy. This is about understanding value, recognizing impact, and making decisions that align not just with winning games, but with growing the sport itself. Because when a generational talent like Caitlin Clark steps onto the court, she doesn't just influence the scoreboard, she changes the entire business ecosystem around the game. Calling what happened a coaching decision feels incomplete. Because when you take a player who has demonstrably reshaped the visibility, popularity, and financial trajectory of an entire league, and you reduce her role to standing in the corner as a spectator within her own team's offense, it raises a much larger concern. That's not just about X's and O's anymore. That's about missed opportunity on a massive scale. To truly understand the weight of this situation, you have to step back and look at the numbers. Not opinions, not narratives, but hard, undeniable data. During her 2024 rookie season, Caitlin Clark didn't just perform well. She triggered a historic surge in interest around the WNBA. The league recorded over 54 million unique viewers across major broadcasting platforms. That number alone signals something extraordinary, but it becomes even more significant when you realize how quickly it happened. Before Clark entered the league, games reaching the 1 million viewer mark were rare to the point of being nearly non-existent. In fact, the league hadn't consistently seen that level of viewership since 2008. Then suddenly, within a single season, 22 different games crossed that threshold. That's not a gradual rise. That's a seismic shift. And Clark was at the center of it. Multiple networks recorded their highest-rated WNBA broadcasts ever, and in nearly every case, Clark was part of the matchup. Her debut alone shattered expectations, becoming one of the most-watched games on major platforms. When she faced top-tier teams, the numbers climbed even higher. When she was part of headline storylines, like the All-Star Game, the audience didn't just grow, it exploded, doubling previous records and bringing millions of new eyes to the sport. But the impact didn't stop at television screens. It carried into arenas. The Indiana Fever, a team that previously averaged modest attendance figures, suddenly became the hottest ticket in the league. Home games that once drew a few thousand fans began selling out massive venues. The team didn't just improve attendance, they redefined it, surpassing milestones that had never been reached before. Opposing teams adjusted their own strategies, moving games to larger arenas just to accommodate the surge in demand whenever Clark was on the schedule. That kind of effect doesn't happen often in sports. It happens when a player becomes bigger than the game itself. Merchandise sales skyrocketed. Digital engagement surged. Subscriptions increased dramatically. The league's visibility expanded across every measurable platform. Even team valuations began to rise, reflecting a new level of financial optimism driven largely by increased fan interest. And while it's true that no single player operates in isolation, it's equally true that some players act as catalysts, forces that accelerate everything around them. Caitlin Clark is that catalyst, which makes what happened in that Puerto Rico game even more difficult to process. Because when you take a player responsible for that level of growth, that level of attention, and that level of excitement, and you place her in a role where she barely touches the ball, where she isn't allowed to dictate tempo, where her greatest strengths are neutralized by design, it doesn't just affect the outcome of a game. It affects the entire experience. Think about it from a broader perspective. Sports history has already given us multiple examples of how transcendent talents are treated at the highest level. When icons like Michael Jordan represented their country, the system didn't limit them. It elevated them. When Kobe Bryant wore the national jersey, the goal wasn't to reduce his role for the sake of balance, it was to maximize his impact. When LeBron James was in his prime, no one suggested that he should step aside so others could feel more involved. Because at that level, the philosophy is simple. When you have greatness, you build around it. You don't dilute it. You don't suppress it. You showcase it.
Absolutely blown the roof off.
But playing at UConn, she is.
That's how you grow the game. That's how you attract new fans. That's how you turn moments into movements. And right now, the data makes one thing very clear. The audience is following Caitlin Clark. Not just casually, but intentionally. When she plays, people watch. When she doesn't, the numbers drop, sometimes dramatically. There have already been instances where viewership declined significantly in games she missed, with measurable decreases that highlight just how much attention she commands. That's not speculation. That's audience behavior reflected in real metrics. Even more telling is how fans are responding in real time. Some have admitted that they don't watch full games anymore unless Clark is actively involved. Others set notifications just to know when she checks in, tuning in specifically for her minutes on the court. That kind of engagement is rare. It shows a direct connection between a player and the audience, a connection that leagues spend decades trying to build. And yet, in that moment against Puerto Rico, that connection was interrupted. Not by injury, not by performance,
but by choice.
Because when a system sidelines its most compelling figure, it doesn't just reduce effectiveness, it risks disengaging the very audience that made the growth possible in the first place. And that's where the concern becomes real. Because momentum in sports, especially in a growing league, is fragile. It takes years to build, and only moments to lose. The influx of new viewers, the rising attendance, the increased revenue, all of it depends on maintaining excitement, maintaining connection, maintaining the elements that brought people in to begin with. If those elements start to disappear, even gradually, the effects can ripple outward. Viewership can decline. Attendance can soften. Casual fans, the ones who are just beginning to engage, can drift away. And once that happens, rebuilding that momentum becomes exponentially harder. This isn't about choosing one player over a team. It's about recognizing what that player represents. Caitlin Clark isn't just producing numbers. She's producing interest. She's driving conversations. She's creating moments that extend beyond the game itself. And when those moments are limited, when that influence is reduced, the impact is felt far beyond a single box score. Which brings us to the deeper question that now hangs over everything. Can brilliance thrive within structure that doesn't fully support it? Or does that structure eventually redefine the brilliance itself? Because talent alone isn't enough, not at this level. It needs the right system, the right freedom, the right alignment between player and philosophy. Without that alignment, even the most extraordinary abilities can be muted. And that's the crossroads we're approaching. The season is still unfolding. Adjustments will be made. Roles may shift again. Nothing is set in stone yet. But every decision from this point forward carries weight, not just for wins and losses, but for the identity of the team and the direction of the league as a whole. Because when you have a player capable of changing everything, the question isn't whether you can win without fully utilizing her. The question is, why would you ever choose to try?